Chicago, Illinois, 2000. A young black husband reported his wife missing after returning from his night shift. Police immediately suspected him. The key evidence? Testimony from his quiet, helpful white neighbor who claimed he heard a violent argument and the wife's keys and wallet found hidden in the husband's toolbox. Convicted on circumstantial evidence, Marcus Holloway served 20 years for a crime he didn't commit, his children believing their father was responsible for their mother's dark fate. Then, in 2021, a wellness check on the now elderly neighbor led police to a soundproofed door in his basement. Behind it, they found the truth. Sarah Holloway, alive, held captive just 50 feet away for 2 decades. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear this. Stories like this, stories of injustice that steal decades from innocent lives, only come to light because people like you choose to listen. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Your presence here, bearing witness, matters. Now, let me tell you the story. The year 2000 felt like a beginning for Marcus and Sarah Holloway. They were young, deeply in love, and standing on the freshly cut lawn of their very own piece of the American dream, a small, tidy bungalow on a quiet, tree-lined street on Chicago's South Side. It wasn't the fanciest house, but it was theirs, bought with years of careful saving. Marcus working double shifts as a factory foreman, Sarah managing a busy downtown bookstore. They were building a life, brick by brick, their future stretching out before them, bright and full of promise. Their neighborhood was a tapestry of working-class families, a mix of brick bungalows and 2 flats, mostly black families like their own, but with a few older white residents who had stayed on as the area changed. It felt safe, familiar, the kind of place where kids played kickball in the street until dusk and neighbors nodded hello over shared fences. One of those neighbors was Mr. Evans. He lived in the house directly next door, a bungalow almost identical to theirs, though perhaps a bit shabbier, the paint peeling slightly around the window frames. He was a man in his late 50s then, pale and thin, with watery blue eyes and a quiet, almost unnervingly still demeanor. He worked, they thought, some kind of office job downtown, leaving early and returning late. He mostly kept to himself. His interactions with Marcus and Sarah were brief, awkward, but seemingly well-intentioned. He'd offered Marcus unsolicited advice on lawn care. "That type of grass needs more nitrogen, son," commented on Sarah's flowers. "Petunias attract aphids, you know." And once helped Marcus carry a heavy toolbox from his car. He seemed harmless, if a bit odd, the kind of quiet, solitary neighbor you acknowledged politely but didn't really know. Sarah sometimes said he gave her a funny feeling, but Marcus dismissed it as city-dweller paranoia. Evans was just a quiet guy, probably lonely. In the hopeful, optimistic glow of their new life, they didn't give him much thought. Their focus was inward, on painting the nursery for the baby they hoped to have soon, on building their future within the 4 walls of their new home. They were blissfully unaware that the greatest threat to that future wasn't some external danger, but the quiet, watchful presence just 50 feet away. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the air crisp with the first real chill of autumn. Inside the Holloway house, the familiar routine of a work night was unfolding. Sarah was packing Marcus's lunch, a thermos of coffee, leftover chicken and rice, an apple. Marcus was lacing up his heavy work boots, getting ready for the graveyard shift at the nearby steel plant. They talked about their day, about Sarah's demanding boss, about the name Marcus's mother had suggested for their future baby, a name they both gently mocked. It was ordinary, comfortable, the easy rhythm of a couple deeply in sync. At 10:45 p.m., Marcus kissed Sarah goodbye at the front door. "Be safe," she murmured, her hand resting briefly on his chest. "You too," he replied. "Lock up tight. See you in the morning." He walked down the porch steps, got into his aging but reliable sedan, and backed out of the driveway, giving a final wave to Sarah, who stood silhouetted in the warm glow of the doorway. He drove off into the night, the familiar route to the factory unfolding before him, his mind already shifting to the demands of the long shift ahead, production quotas, safety checks, the drone of the machinery. Back at the house, Sarah locked the front door, bolted it, and engaged the chain. She checked the back door, turned off the downstairs lights, and headed upstairs to their bedroom. She likely read for a while, maybe called her sister, then eventually turned off her bedside lamp, the house settling into the deep, quiet stillness of a sleeping neighborhood. From the house next door, perhaps a curtain twitched. Perhaps a pair of eyes watched Sarah's bedroom light go out. Perhaps the quiet neighbor noted the precise moment the Holloway house fell silent. Later, much later, investigators would try to piece together the unseen events of that night. Were there sounds? A muffled cry quickly stifled? The scrape of a ladder against siding? The click of a window lock being expertly jimmied? No one heard anything. No one saw anything. In a neighborhood where people prided themselves on looking out for each other, the night Sarah Holloway vanished was marked only by its profound, terrifying, and ordinary silence. The only certainty was that sometime between Marcus driving away at 10:50 p.m. and the first rays of dawn painting the sky, Sarah Holloway disappeared from the locked sanctuary of her own home, leaving behind no witnesses, no signs of struggle, and no clue as to where she had gone. Marcus Holloway pulled into his driveway just after 7:15 a.m. The sky a pale, washed-out gray. He was bone-tired, the familiar ache of a long night shift settling into his muscles. All he wanted was a hot shower, a quick bite to eat, and the familiar comfort of crawling into bed beside his wife. He unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and immediately felt a prickle of unease. The house was too quiet. Usually, Sarah would be up by now, the smell of coffee brewing, maybe some soft music playing on the radio. "Sarah?" he called out, shrugging off his heavy work jacket. "Honey, I'm home." Silence. He walked into the kitchen. No coffee, no sign of breakfast, just the neat, undisturbed quiet of the night before. The prickle of unease intensified, becoming a cold knot in his stomach. He went upstairs, his steps quickening. Sarah? Their bedroom was empty. The bed was still made, undisturbed from the night before. Her pajamas were folded neatly on the chair where she always left them. He checked the bathroom. Empty. The closet. Her work clothes were laid out, ready for her shift at the bookstore later that morning. Panic began to claw at his throat. This was wrong. Terribly wrong. He raced back downstairs, his mind a frantic whirl. Had she gotten sick in the night? Gone to the hospital? Left him a note? He checked the kitchen counter, the living room table. Nothing. He grabbed his cell phone, a clunky early model, and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. He called her sister, his voice tight with a forced calm. "Hey, is Sarah with you? Did she mention going anywhere this morning?" No, her sister hadn't heard from her since the night before. The cold knot in his stomach was now a full-blown, nauseating terror. He did the only thing he could think of. He called 911. "My wife," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. "She's gone. I just got home from work, and she's not here. The doors were locked. Her car is still here. She's just gone." Two uniformed officers arrived 20 minutes later. Their initial demeanor was professional, sympathetic, but as Marcus, pacing frantically, tried to explain the impossible situation, he felt a subtle shift in their questions, in their gazes. "So, you two have any arguments last night before you left for work?" one officer asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp, assessing. "No, of course not," Marcus insisted. "Everything was fine. Normal." "Anyone else have a key to the house?" the other officer queried. "No, just us." "Any history of her? Leaving like this? Taking off for a few days?" "Never. She would never do that," Marcus said, the implication hitting him like a physical blow. They weren't looking for Sarah. They were looking at him. He saw the flicker of suspicion in their eyes, the almost imperceptible way they exchanged a glance. He was a young black man, agitated, reporting his wife missing under strange circumstances. In their eyes, the narrative was already forming. The simplest, most statistically convenient explanation clicking into place before the investigation had even truly begun. He wasn't the distraught husband. He was the prime suspect. The accusing gaze of the system had already fallen upon him. While one team of officers continued to question Marcus inside the house, another began the routine canvass of the immediate neighbors. They knocked on doors, asking the standard questions. Did you see or hear anything unusual last night? Did you notice any strange cars? Most neighbors offered variations of the same answer. No, it was a quiet night, nothing out of the ordinary. And then they knocked on Mr. Evans's door. He answered promptly, dressed in neat slacks and a button-down shirt, looking like a man just about to leave for his day at the office. His expression was one of mild, concerned surprise. When the officers explained the situation, that Sarah Holloway, the young woman next door, was missing, Evans's pale face registered what appeared to be genuine shock and concern. "Oh my goodness," he said, his voice soft, slightly reedy. "That's terrible. Sarah, such a sweet girl. Is there anything I can do?" The officers asked him the standard questions. Did he see or hear anything unusual? Evans paused, stroking his chin thoughtfully, looking like a man carefully searching his memory for any helpful detail. "Well," he began, his tone hesitant, as if reluctant to speak ill of his neighbors. "I don't want to cause trouble, but I did hear something last night, before Marcus left for work." The officers leaned in, their interest piqued. "What did you hear, Mr. Evans?" "It sounded like an argument," Evans said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Raised voices. It's none of my business, of course, but it sounded heated. I couldn't make out the words, not clearly, but the tone. It was angry." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Did you hear anything else?" one officer pressed. "Any other sounds?" Evans nodded slowly, his eyes wide with feigned reluctance. "Yes. After the shouting stopped, I heard a loud thud, like something heavy falling. And then, maybe a scream? I couldn't be sure. It was muffled. Cut off quick." He looked genuinely distressed. "I almost called the police then. But, well, you know how couples are. I didn't want to interfere. And then I saw Marcus leave for work a few minutes later, same time as always. And I figured it had just blown over." It was a performance of devastating effectiveness. Evans delivered his story with the quiet, hesitant sincerity of a man burdened by terrible knowledge. He wasn't accusatory. He was concerned. He wasn't gossiping. He was providing crucial context. He painted a picture of domestic strife, escalating into potential violence, a narrative that fit perfectly with the officers' pre-existing suspicions about Marcus. Evans's testimony was the key the police had been looking for, the piece that seemed to unlock the entire puzzle. It provided a motive, a violent argument, a timeline before Marcus left for work, and the suggestion of a physical altercation, the thud, the muffled scream. He was the perfect witness. White, middle-aged, employed, seemingly objective, and living right next door. His quiet, helpful words were the poison that would irrevocably taint the investigation, sealing Marcus Holloway's fate before any real evidence had even been gathered. The neighbor's story became the official story. Armed with Mr. Evans's compelling, seemingly objective testimony, the police investigation shifted its focus entirely onto Marcus Holloway. The search for Sarah became secondary. The primary goal was now to find the evidence that would confirm their rapidly solidifying theory. Marcus had harmed his wife during an argument and disposed of her body before coolly heading off to his night shift. The presumption of innocence evaporated, replaced by the relentless pursuit of confirmation bias. They obtained a warrant to search the Holloway home and property, not as a potential crime scene related to a missing person, but as the residence of the prime suspect. The search was conducted with a forensic, almost predatory, intensity that was vastly different from the initial, cursory walkthrough. Officers, now accompanied by detectives and crime scene technicians, descended on the small bungalow. They dusted for fingerprints, sprayed luminol looking for traces of blood, and meticulously cataloged every item. They questioned Marcus for hours, their tone no longer sympathetic but accusatory, probing for inconsistencies in his story, twisting his grief-stricken confusion into signs of guilt. Marcus, exhausted, terrified, and utterly bewildered by the turn of events, could only repeat the truth. He had left for work, and when he returned, Sarah was gone. His denials, however, were interpreted as defensiveness, his lack of an alibi for the crucial pre-work hours painted as damning. The crucial discovery came not in the house itself, but in the detached garage at the back of the property. While Marcus was being interrogated downtown, a team searched the cluttered space, a typical homeowner's garage filled with gardening tools, old paint cans, and Marcus's collection of automotive tools. A detective opened the large rolling drawers of Marcus's main tool cabinet. In the back of the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a set of rarely used wrenches and oily rags, he found them: Sarah's car keys and her small leather wallet. The discovery was presented as the smoking gun, the irrefutable proof of Marcus's guilt. The narrative was simple and damning. After harming Sarah, Marcus had hidden her keys and wallet to make it look like she had left willingly, but in his haste or panic, he had chosen a poor hiding spot. It was the act of a guilty man trying, and failing, to cover his tracks. Of course, the truth was far more sinister. The keys and wallet had been planted. Mr. Evans, under the cover of darkness, sometime after Sarah's disappearance, and before the police arrived, had likely slipped into the unlocked garage, perhaps using a spare key he had access to, or simply finding the side door unsecured, and placed the items where they would inevitably be found. It was a simple, devastatingly effective act of sabotage, a planted seed of guilt designed to take root in the fertile ground of the investigators' existing suspicions. For the police, the discovery was confirmation. For Marcus, it was the final, incomprehensible nail in his coffin. He vehemently denied hiding the items, insisting he had no idea how they got there. But his protestations were futile. The physical evidence, combined with the neighbor's eyewitness account of an argument, formed a seemingly unbreakable circumstantial case. The planted seed had taken root, and the wheels of a terrible injustice were now irrevocably in motion. The trial of Marcus Holloway began in the fall of 2001, nearly a year after Sarah's disappearance. The courtroom was packed, the case having drawn significant local media attention due to its mysterious nature and the underlying racial tensions that simmered beneath the surface. Marcus sat at the defense table, looking gaunt and haunted, a shadow of the vibrant young man he had been just a year prior. His public defender, an overworked but dedicated woman named Maria Sanchez, faced an uphill battle from the start. The prosecution's case, presented by a confident, sharp-suited assistant district attorney, was a masterclass in building a narrative from circumstantial evidence. There was no body, a fact the prosecutor skillfully turned to his advantage, suggesting Marcus had been chillingly effective in disposing of his wife's remains. There was no direct forensic evidence, no blood, no fibers, no DNA linking Marcus to any violent act. The state's entire case rested on two pillars: the testimony of Mr. Evans and the discovery of the keys and wallet. Mr. Evans took the stand and delivered his story with the same quiet, hesitant, and utterly convincing sincerity he had shown the police. He recounted hearing the loud argument, the specific, angry words he now remembered, Marcus shouting, the heavy thud, the muffled scream. He dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief, portraying himself as a man tormented by what he had heard, a reluctant witness, burdened by a terrible truth. On cross-examination, Sanchez tried to undermine his credibility, pointing out inconsistencies in his timeline and questioning his ability to hear specifics through closed doors and walls. But Evans remained unshaken, his calm, polite demeanor making him appear utterly credible to the jury. He was the perfect, unassuming picture of civic duty. The prosecution then presented the discovery of the keys and wallet. The detective who found them described the location in the back of the tool cabinet drawer, emphasizing how they appeared deliberately concealed. Photographs of the items, nestled beneath the oily rags, were displayed for the jury. The implication was clear and powerful. Only the person responsible for Sarah's disappearance would have hidden these items. Sanchez argued vehemently that the items could have been planted, that the garage was potentially accessible, but with no proof of tampering and no alternative suspect. Her argument sounded like desperate speculation. Sanchez did her best to present Marcus's side. She called character witnesses: his mother, his supervisor from the factory, friends, who all testified to his gentle nature, his deep love for Sarah, and the utter implausibility of him committing such an act. Marcus himself took the stand, his voice thick with emotion as he described the morning he found Sarah gone, his frantic search, his call to the police. He denied any argument, denied hiding the keys, denied having anything to do with his wife's disappearance. But under the prosecutor's relentless, accusatory cross-examination, his grief looked like guilt, his confusion like evasion. The narrative had been set, and every denial only seemed to dig him deeper. The trial was not a search for truth. It was a performance, and the prosecution, armed with a star witness and a powerful piece of planted evidence, delivered the more convincing story. The jury deliberated for 2 days. To Marcus and his small, hopeful group of supporters, the length of the deliberation felt like a positive sign, an indication that the jury was wrestling with the profound lack of direct evidence, with the reasonable doubt that his lawyer had fought so hard to establish. But when they finally filed back into the courtroom, their faces were grim, unreadable, their eyes avoiding Marcus's desperate, pleading gaze. The court clerk took the verdict form from the foreman. The room was utterly silent. The only sound, the rustle of paper, the collective held breath of everyone present. Marcus gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles white, his entire future hanging in this single, suspended moment. In the matter of the state versus Marcus Holloway, the clerk read, her voice flat, emotionless. On the charge of first degree. She paused, clearing her throat. Regarding the disappearance of Sarah Holloway, we, the jury, find the defendant. Another agonizing pause. Guilty. A strangled cry broke from Marcus's mother in the front row. Marcus himself felt the floor drop out from beneath him, a physical sensation of falling into a bottomless void. Guilty. The word echoed in the silent courtroom, a pronouncement that felt both impossible and inevitable. Guilty, despite no body. Guilty, despite no weapon. Guilty, despite no confession. Guilty, based on the word of a quiet neighbor and a wallet found in a toolbox. His lawyer, Maria Sanchez, immediately began arguing for leniency, citing the purely circumstantial nature of the case, Marcus's clean record, his steady employment. But the judge, reflecting the jury's conviction and perhaps the subtle pressure of public opinion, was unmoved. Mr. Holloway, the judge said, his voice stern, the evidence presented, while circumstantial, paints a clear and disturbing picture. Your neighbor heard a violent altercation. Your wife's essential belongings were found hidden in your possession. Your inability to explain these facts, coupled with the fact that Sarah Holloway has not been seen or heard from in over a year, leads this court to only one conclusion. He paused, looking directly at Marcus. You took steps to silence your wife and conceal your actions. For this, you must be held accountable. The sentence was swift and brutal. 25 years to life. Marcus was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. He looked back once, his eyes finding his mother's, a silent, desperate plea passing between them. And then, he was gone, swallowed by the institutional machinery of a justice system that had, in his case, delivered not justice, but a profound and irreversible injustice. The void that had opened the morning he found Sarah gone had now become his permanent reality, a 20-year abyss carved out by a neighbor's lie and a system's willingness to believe it. The heavy steel gates of Stateville Correctional Center clanged shut behind Marcus Holloway, the sound echoing the finality of his sentence. He was 28 years old. The world outside, the life he had known, ceased to exist. His new reality was a landscape of gray, concrete, razor wire, and the constant, dehumanizing hum of institutional control. The first few years were a blur of shock, rage, and a grief so profound it felt like a physical illness. He replayed the trial in his mind 1,000 times, searching for the moment it had all gone wrong, clinging to the impossible hope that some overlooked piece of evidence would surface, that Sarah would walk through the door, that the nightmare would end. But the nightmare only deepened. He maintained his innocence, vehemently, consistently, to anyone who would listen, his lawyer, his cellmates, the parole board. But his cries fell on deaf ears. He was just another inmate proclaiming his innocence. Another statistic in a system built on the presumption of guilt once a verdict was rendered. His lawyer filed appeal after appeal, citing the lack of physical evidence, questioning the reliability of Evans's testimony, raising issues of potential racial bias in the initial investigation. Each appeal was methodically denied. The system had spoken, and it did not like to admit mistakes. The hardest part was the slow, agonizing erosion of his connection to the outside world, especially to his children. His son, Marcus Jr., was 4 when he went inside. His daughter, Maya, just 2. They were being raised by Sarah's sister, a kind but overwhelmed woman who did her best to navigate the impossible situation. The first few years, the children visited regularly, their small faces pressed against the thick plexiglass of the visiting room, their conversations stilted, confused. But as they grew older, the visits became less frequent. The story they were told, the story the world believed, was that their father had done something terrible to their mother. How could they reconcile that narrative with the quiet, sad man who looked at them with such desperate love from behind the glass? The questions in their eyes were too painful. The visits dwindled, replaced by occasional, awkward letters. Marcus watched his children grow up in photographs, their milestones marked by crayon drawings and school report cards mailed to his prison address. He was a ghost in their lives, a source of shame and confusion. He aged inside those walls. His youthful energy gave way to a weary, stoic resignation. The hope of exoneration never died completely, but it became a small, tightly guarded ember in the vast darkness of his confinement. He worked in the prison library, finding a measure of solace in the quiet order of the books. He read constantly, educating himself, keeping his mind sharp even as his body grew old before its time. He saw men come and go, heard their stories, witnessed the casual brutality and the quiet desperation of lives lived in cages. He learned the hard, bitter truth of the system. It was not designed to find truth, only to maintain order. 20 years passed. 20 years of silence, of waiting, of a life stolen by a lie whispered over a backyard fence. While Marcus Holloway marked the passage of time by the changing seasons glimpsed through a barred window, life on the quiet street where he used to live continued its slow, inexorable march. Children grew up, families moved in and out, the neighborhood aged, and in the house next door to the now empty Holloway bungalow, sold years ago in a foreclosure, Mr. Evans also aged. He had always been a solitary man, but in the 2 decades following Marcus's conviction, his reclusiveness deepened, calcifying into an almost hermetic isolation. He retired from his anonymous office job and rarely left his house. Neighbors would see him occasionally, a stooped, frail figure tending obsessively to his small, overgrown garden, his movements slow, his watery blue eyes seeming to look through people rather than at them. He never spoke, responding to greetings with only a curt, dismissive nod. The house around him mirrored his own decline. The paint peeled further, the gutters sagged, the once neat lawn became a tangle of weeds. He became the neighborhood eccentric, the creepy old man in the decaying house, a figure parents warned their children away from, though no one could articulate exactly why. He was just unsettling. In the early months of 2021, his health took a sharp, visible downturn. Neighbors noticed he seemed unsteady on his feet, his already thin frame appearing almost skeletal. He became a client of the city's Meals on Wheels program. His only regular human contact, the brief, daily visit from a volunteer driver who would leave a prepared meal on his porch. Then, one Tuesday in March, the driver, a cheerful, middle-aged woman named Brenda, arrived to find Monday's meal still sitting untouched on the porch swing, exposed to the elements. She knocked on the door, loudly, repeatedly. No answer. She peered through the grimy front window, but could see nothing through the clutter and drawn shades. A cold knot of worry formed in her stomach. Mr. Evans was strange, but he was always prompt about retrieving his meals. 3 days passed. Wednesday's meal joined Mondays and Tuesdays on the porch. Brenda knew something was seriously wrong. Following protocol, she called 911 and requested a wellness check. The quiet, solitary life of Mr. Evans, the life he had so carefully curated to keep his secrets hidden, was about to be forcibly breached. The catalyst for the truth would not be a detective's investigation or a deathbed confession, but the simple, humane concern of a Meals on Wheels driver. The police cruiser pulled up quietly in front of the neglected Evans house, its lights off. 2 officers, Miller, a seasoned veteran, and Chen, a rookie barely a year out of the academy, got out and approached the porch. The 3 untouched meal containers sat there, a small, sad testament to the reason for their call. Officer Miller knocked loudly on the front door. "Mr. Evans? Chicago Police Department. Are you okay in there?" Silence. They walked around the house, peering into the grimy windows. The curtains were drawn tight, revealing nothing. They tried the back door. It was locked. Miller sighed. Wellness checks on elderly recluses rarely ended well. He radioed dispatch, requesting paramedics and authorization for a forced entry. While they waited, Officer Chen noticed something odd. The basement windows, small, rectangular openings near the ground, were not just covered by curtains. They were completely blacked out, painted over from the inside with thick, black paint. "That's weird," Chen commented. Miller just shrugged. "Old guy. Privacy." The paramedics arrived, followed shortly by a fire department truck carrying the necessary breaching tools. With the authorization confirmed, a firefighter used a Halligan bar to pry open the front door. The lock splintered with a sharp crack, and the door swung inward with a low groan. The smell hit them first. A thick, suffocating stench of decay, of unwashed bodies, of hoarding. The inside of the house was even worse than the outside suggested. Every surface was covered in towering piles of old newspapers, junk mail, empty food containers, and miscellaneous clutter. Narrow pathways snaked through the debris. It was the home of a man who had completely retreated from the world, burying himself alive in his own refuse. "Mr. Evans?" Miller called out again, his voice muffled by the oppressive clutter. They heard a faint groan coming from the direction of the living room. Following the sound, they found him. Mr. Evans was lying on the floor, tangled in a filthy blanket, wedged between a leaning tower of newspapers and an overturned armchair. He was conscious, but barely. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and a low, incoherent moan escaped his lips. His left side was unnaturally still. It was clear he had suffered a severe stroke and had been lying there, helpless, for days. The paramedics moved in immediately, their professionalism cutting through the chaos of the scene. They checked his vitals, carefully extricated him from the debris, and got him onto a stretcher. As they were carrying him out, Evans's eyes briefly focused, landing on Officer Chen. His lips moved, forming a single, slurred, almost inaudible word. Chen leaned closer. It sounded like basement. Then his eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness again. Chen frowned, unsettled. Was it a delirious utterance, or something more? He mentioned it to Miller as Evans was loaded into the ambulance. Miller, preoccupied with securing the now vacant property, waved it off. "Probably just imagining things. Let's clear the house and get out of here. Place gives me the creeps." With Mr. Evans transported to the hospital, the task fell to Officers Miller and Chen to conduct a final sweep of the house, ensuring no one else was inside and securing the property. Miller, eager to leave the oppressive, foul-smelling environment, quickly checked the upstairs rooms, finding only more clutter and decay. Chen, the rookie, was assigned the main floor. He moved slowly through the narrow pathways, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim, dusty air. The sheer volume of stuff was overwhelming. It was hard to even see the walls. He checked the kitchen, a landscape of overflowing trash bags and dirty dishes. He checked a small back bedroom, its bed buried under a mountain of old clothes. As he stood in the center of the small, cluttered dining room, waiting for Miller to come back down, he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was faint, barely audible above the hum of the ancient refrigerator in the kitchen. He froze, listening intently. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and it sounded like it was coming from below him. He looked down at the filthy, linoleum-covered floorboards. Tap, tap, tap. He crouched down, pressing his ear to the floor. The sound was clearer now, a distinct, metallic tapping, seemingly coming directly from the basement beneath his feet. He felt a cold prickle of unease crawl up his spine. Evans's delirious whisper flashed into his mind. "Basement. Miller," Chen called out, his voice tight. "You gotta hear this." Miller descended the stairs, his expression impatient. "What is it, Chen? Let's wrap this up." "Listen," Chen whispered, pointing down. Miller frowned, then crouched beside his partner, his ear to the floor. The tapping continued, faint but undeniable. Miller's expression changed, his impatience replaced by a sudden, sharp alertness. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. They quickly located the basement door, hidden behind a rack of dusty, moth-eaten coats in a small hallway off the kitchen. It was unlocked. Miller drew his service weapon, Chen doing the same. With a silent nod, Miller turned the knob and pulled the door open, revealing a steep, narrow flight of wooden stairs descending into absolute blackness. The musty, stagnant air of the basement rose to meet them, thicker and colder than the air upstairs. "Chicago PD!" Miller shouted down the stairs, his voice echoing in the darkness. "Anyone down there?" Only silence answered. But then, as they stood listening in the doorway, the tapping started again, louder now, more insistent, seemingly coming from the far corner of the basement below. It wasn't the random sound of a settling house or dripping water. It was the sound of someone, or something, desperately trying to get their attention. Officers Miller and Chen descended the creaking wooden stairs cautiously, their flashlight beams cutting twin paths through the oppressive darkness of the basement. The air was cold, damp, and thick with the smell of mildew and something else, a faint, stale odor that Chen couldn't quite place. The basement was as cluttered as the rest of the house, a subterranean landscape of forgotten junk, old furniture draped in dusty sheets, stacks of collapsing cardboard boxes, rust-eaten tools hanging precariously from the low ceiling joists. The tapping sound led them towards the far corner of the basement. As they got closer, they saw that the source was hidden behind a large, heavy, gray metal storage cabinet, the kind used for storing tools or paint supplies. The cabinet was pushed tight against the cinder block wall, blocking access to whatever was behind it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming directly from the other side of the cabinet. "Police!" Miller called out again, his voice sharp. "Who's back there?" A faint, muffled sound, like a weak, scraping sob, answered them. It was unmistakably human. Miller and Chen exchanged a look of stunned disbelief. Someone was behind the cabinet. Using their combined strength, they strained to move the heavy steel cabinet. It scraped reluctantly across the concrete floor, revealing what it had been concealing. It wasn't just a wall. It was a door. A newer, solid wood door, shockingly out of place in the ancient, crumbling basement. The door was reinforced with what looked like soundproofing material around its edges, and it was secured not with a knob or a lock, but with two heavy-duty industrial slide bolts, bolted firmly from the outside. The tapping stopped. A new sound began, a low, continuous, desperate whimpering from the other side of the door. Miller felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. This wasn't just hoarding. This wasn't just neglect. This was something else. Something dark. He drew his weapon again. "Stand back from the door," he commanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. There was no need for breaching tools this time. The bolts were simple, if heavy. Miller slid the top bolt back, the sound echoing loudly in the tense silence. Chen slid the bottom bolt. Miller gripped the simple metal handle that had been installed on the outside and pulled. The door swung inward, revealing a small, dark, windowless space. The smell that hit them was overwhelming. Stale air, unwashed bodies, despair. Their flashlight beams swept across the tiny room. It contained only a thin mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, and a scattering of empty food cans and plastic water bottles. And huddled on the mattress, blinking against the sudden, blinding light, her form skeletal, her hair matted and white, her skin unnaturally pale, was a woman. She flinched, raising a frail, trembling hand to shield her eyes, letting out a small, terrified whimper. Chen lowered his flashlight slightly, his own face pale with shock. "Ma'am, are you okay? Who are you?" The woman lowered her hand slowly, her eyes wide and haunted, struggling to focus. She opened her mouth, her lips cracked and dry, and spoke a single word, her voice a raspy, unused whisper, a ghost of a sound from a long-forgotten past. "Sarah." The discovery in Mr. Evans's basement sent shockwaves not just through the neighborhood, but through the entire city and the justice system itself. Sarah Holloway, the woman presumed gone for 20 years, the woman her husband had been convicted of harming, was alive. She had been alive the entire time, held captive in a soundproofed room, just 50 feet from the home she had once shared with her husband. The news reached Marcus Holloway in the sterile visiting room of Stateville Correctional Center. His lawyer, Maria Sanchez, now gray-haired but still fighting, delivered the news, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus, now a 60-year-old man with the weary eyes of someone who had seen too much, listened in stunned silence. He showed no joy, no anger, only a profound, hollow emptiness, the reaction of a man whose reality had been so fundamentally broken that even liberation felt unreal. His exoneration was swift. The evidence was irrefutable. Within days, the conviction was vacated, the charges dismissed. Marcus Holloway walked out of the prison gates, blinking in the bright sunlight, a free man after 7,305 days of wrongful incarceration. He was met by news cameras and reporters shouting questions, but he said nothing. He was driven away, a bewildered stranger in a world that had moved on without him. His reunion with Sarah was arranged quietly, away from the media circus, in a private room at the hospital where she was slowly, painstakingly recovering. It was a meeting freighted with unimaginable weight. They were husband and wife, yet they were strangers. Their shared past buried under 2 decades of separate, isolating trauma. Sarah, frail and deeply traumatized, barely recognized the prematurely aged man who stood before her. Marcus looked at the pale, haunted woman who was his wife and saw only the ghost of the vibrant young woman he had loved. Their reunion was not a joyous Hollywood ending, but the quiet, heartbreaking beginning of a long, uncertain road towards a future neither of them could have ever imagined. And what of Mr. Evans, the architect of this decades-long nightmare? He lay in a hospital bed, partially paralyzed, his mind ravaged by the stroke and advanced dementia. He was arrested, charged with kidnapping and unlawful confinement. But justice, in its final, cruelest twist, would remain elusive. His high-priced lawyer, hired by a distant relative, argued convincingly that Evans was medically unfit to stand trial. He could not understand the charges against him, could not assist in his own defense. Instead of a prison cell, the place Marcus had unjustly occupied for 20 years, Evans was committed indefinitely to a secure state medical facility. He would live out his remaining days receiving round-the-clock care, his horrific crimes effectively erased by the fog of his own cognitive decline. The injustice was staggering, almost too bitter to comprehend. Marcus Holloway, the innocent man, had served 2 decades in a maximum security prison. Arthur Evans, the guilty man, the monster who had stolen 40 years of life, 20 from Sarah, 20 from Marcus, would face no trial, no prison sentence, only the quiet, clinical confines of a hospital ward. The system that had failed Marcus so catastrophically 20 years earlier had, in the end, failed him again, delivering a final, brutal lesson in the unequal and often elusive nature of justice itself.